Hello my friends, today I have a video that is a bit different for you guys. On July 14, 2022, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US Congress, gave a press conference. Among many other topics, she talked about inflation, and she said to all the American people and to the world why inflation was taking place. For your information, inflation in June 2022 in the US was 9.1%. And according to Nancy Pelosi, the only people responsible for the high inflation in the US are the evil, greedy oil companies and the evil, greedy shipping companies. At no point did she ever mention that maybe the reason there was such a high inflation was because they are printing money like it was confetti. And her comments are pretty controversial to say the least. I had the idea to do a short reaction video about that, and it is the perfect opportunity. I've been wanting to do a reaction video for a while, and since most of my audience is in the US, it's the perfect occasion. Alright, let's see what she says.
We recognize the challenge inflation is to kitchen table budgeting for America's working families. We want to lower cost for food, lower cost for fuel, lower cost for many of their expenses. And many of it spring from price gouging by oil and gas companies.
Okay, let's make a first break here.
Expenses, and many of it spring from price gouging by oil and gas companies.
No, the reason why oil is so expensive is because of market conditions, and in particular, the war in Ukraine. The increasing demand for oil and the decreasing supply of oil contributed to the high price of oil. It is not because of price gouging of big oil companies. The oil companies are simply adapting their prices to the market conditions. And let's use some logic here for a second. Let's think again about 2020 and 2021, when the price of oil was so cheap. Were the big oil companies there suddenly generous and philanthropists? The answer is no again. Oil companies, again, adapted to the market conditions. They always adapt to the market conditions, whether the price is low or high. And also, if price gouging was that easy, if it was really that easy to increase the price of oil for no reason, why didn't they do it in 2020 and 2021 when oil was so cheap? Or throughout the 2010s decade, 2014, 2015, 2016, where oil was cheap? Why didn't they just increase the price if it is really that easy? All that goes to show that oil companies are price takers, not price makers. And if there was some price gouging, which it is a possibility, maybe there was a little bit of price gouging and contributed at best marginally to the price of oil. But hey, using evil, greedy companies as scapegoats is always easy.
And many of it spring from price gouging by oil and gas companies, exorbitant prices by shipping companies, which has an impact on the supply chain. Supply chain is diminished, costs go up.
There again, it is exactly the same answer. It's not because shipping companies are doing price gouging that the supply chains are weak. It's because the supply chains are weak that shipping costs are so high. In particular, the zero COVID policy in China. Whenever there is a single case of COVID in China, they shut down entire cities, and they also shut down the ports, the harbors, the factories, and so on, which of course diminishes the supply chains. Weak supply chains are the cause of high shipping costs, not the effect. And another reason shipping costs are so high is because shipping companies are understaffed. They simply don't have enough employees, and they don't have enough boats, and they don't have enough airplanes. It's exactly the same scenario for airlines. If ticket prices are so high for airlines, it's not because of price gouging, it's because of the market conditions. There's simply not enough staff and not enough resources. But again, blaming somebody else and blaming evil, greedy companies who are only interested in money is much easier.
We also are continuing to pass bills to lower costs for families, lowering gas prices, passing our Consumer Fuel Price Gouging Prevention Act, to crack down on price gouging on big oil, for lowering food costs by taking further action to lower gas costs, which have an impact on food costs because farmers need gas.
Alright, it's already the end of her commentary about inflation. It was pretty short. I put the link of the video in the description below, and I invite you to watch it by yourself. What we're going to remember from this video is that she blames evil, greedy corporations because of the high inflation rate in the US, which of course is BS. Those corporations increase their price because of the changing market conditions. That's the main reason. Maybe there is a little bit of price gouging, but it is marginal. She also mentions that she wants to pass a couple of bills to reduce the price of those items. It's not very clear what those bills are all about. maybe they want to put a price ceiling on oil and other items. And I'm not really going to talk about it in this video, I already talked about it at length in this other video. I invite you to check that out. But also something else, her commentary is misleading. She gives the impression that the only reason of inflation is the rising cost of oil and shipping costs, which of course is not the case. And as I said at the beginning of the video, a big reason why inflation is so high is because the US government is printing money like there was no tomorrow. To give you a proof of that, in the US, in 2021, the inflation rate was 7%, and all throughout 2021, the price of oil was pretty low. Of course, the weak supply chains also contributed to the high inflation rate in 2021, but I think it is safe to say that the main reason of the inflation in 2021 and 2022 is money printing. For those of you who are new to this channel, when the government prints money, it increases inflation because the value of the money diminishes because they are the same goods but a bigger amount of money. And mathematically, the value of that money diminishes and the prices go up. It's called monetary inflation. And it is exactly what we're witnessing today. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, governments all throughout the world, and in particular the United States, spent much more money than what they made with taxes. That's called fiscal deficit, when the government spends more than what it makes. And since the fiscal deficit in 2020 and 2021 was so enormous due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all those governments around the world, and specifically the United States, started printing money to compensate this big deficit, which caused the monetary inflation we're witnessing today. And of course, the war in Ukraine and the increased price of oil made the inflation even worse, but it doesn't change the fact that at core, this inflation is monetary. Let's compare the United States with the high inflation and high deficit with Switzerland. Switzerland has a much lower inflation rate compared to the United States, 3.4% versus 9.1%. And I can tell you personally, since I live in Switzerland, that here gasoline also got a hell of a lot more expensive. Swiss gasoline is actually more expensive than American gasoline. But despite that fact, inflation here is much lower. Why? Because the government here in Switzerland is not printing money. And why are they not printing money? Because the fiscal deficit is much, much lower. To give you an idea, the fiscal deficit in Switzerland in 2020 and 2022 was around 3 and 0.7% of GDP. Compare that with the United States, where the fiscal deficit was 14 and 16% of GDP. So you see, two countries facing the same situation with high gasoline price, but with much different results. But I know some people will complain about this example, saying that it's unfair because Switzerland is a small country and it has a strong currency. Alright, fair enough. Let's take another example. Let's take Australia. The inflation rate in Australia in March 2022 was 5.1%, whereas in the United States it was 9.2%. So in Australia it was roughly half. And now if we look at the fiscal deficit of Australia in 2020-2021, unsurprisingly it was 4.3% and 7.8%, much lower than the United States, and in 2021 it was roughly half. What a coincidence, right? Australia had half of the fiscal deficit of the US in 2021, and they also have half of the inflation rate. What a coinkydink. That again goes to show that the inflation that we're living right now is mostly monetary. And no, it's not because of the evil oil companies or the evil greedy shipping companies. Sorry, Nancy. So why did Nancy Pelosi say such a thing? Because she's not stupid. Of course she knows all that. She said all of that for a very simple reason. She doesn't want the people to acknowledge and to know that the inflation they're living right now is mostly because of the government, mostly because they didn't stop printing money and it's their fault. And the Democrats are really worried that the high inflation is going to cost them a re-election in 2024. As a result, they're doing everything they can so that the people blame somebody else for the high inflation. And of course, the evil, greedy oil companies were easy targets. Since they already have a bad reputation, it's easy to portray them as the bad guys. But I think this strategy is going to backfire. Now, this is purely my personal opinion, but I think it would work better for those politicians to take ownership if they showed to the people that they can recognize the mistakes that they have made and show that they have learned from those mistakes and that they will do better in the future. It would be a better strategy than blaming somebody else and then hoping that people are naive enough to believe it. But hey, those are politics. This game is like that. I hope you enjoyed this reaction video. If there is another video you want me to comment in the future, please send me an email to the address that is in the description below. And I will see you soon.